You're listening to the Doc Lounge podcast. This is a place for candid conversations with healthcare industry's top physicians, executives, and thought leaders. This podcast is made possible by Pacific Companies, your trusted advisor in physician recruitment. I am your host, Summer Gilbert, and I am the Director of Marketing and Branding here at Pacific Companies. And co-hosting with me today, I have our Director of Recruitment, Casey Galpin. Today on the podcast, we're talking to Dr. Michael Fenster, Interventional Cardiologist and Professor of Culinary Medicine. He is passionate about how food affects our health, and which led to a website, chefdrmike.com, then which led to a cookbook, Let Food Be Thy Medicine, and now he is filming a health television pilot called Dr. Mike Cooks. We are really excited to have him on the podcast, so let's give Dr. Michael Fenster a warm welcome, and let's get started. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is intended to be an open forum. Any personal beliefs, views, or opinions represented in this episode are that of our guest and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Pacific Companies. So please have an open mind and remember that this podcast is not a news source, but rather a safe and neutral platform for candid conversations. Thank you so much, Dr. Fenster, for talking with us today.
Oh, thank you all for having me today. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you.
So I'm going to throw this over to Casey to get us started.
Yeah, Dr. Fenster, what we like to do is just to give everybody that's listening kind of a basis for you. Can you give us a quick overview of your background, where you grew up, what kind of training you went through, and where you're at now?
Well, sure. I grew up all along the East Coast. I was born in South Bronx, me and J-Lo hanging in the hood. Then I grew up in upstate New York, the New Jersey area. And I then moved to Pittsburgh for high school and really was in the South for a good bit after that, attending medical school at the Medical College of Virginia, University of Virginia, where I did cardiology, interventional cardiology, some NIH-sponsored research for a couple of years in microvascular physiology. And then again, I kind of stayed in the South doing my residency at Wake Forest, Bowman Gray Hospital, and then really practiced pretty much in the South, in the Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida area, doing interventional cardiology. Before I went to medical school, I had picked up a job working in the restaurant industry, which was pretty natural for me. My background, my mom was a great home cook. I remember watching the old shows, Julia Child, Graham Kerr, cooking shows with her. So food had always been a passion of mine. And so I got into the restaurant industry, actually as a dishwasher, then worked my way up to executive chef, and really kept that love of food, that passion for great food and what I call a food experience. And then over the years, though it seems like these are very dichotomous disciplines, interventional cardiology and diet, over the years they've really come back together and melded. And right now I do some locums work, and I also teach culinary medicine, which is an emerging discipline at the University of Montana, and we're in the process. We launched our first class introduction to culinary medicine. A great response from the attendees of the college, and we're in the process now of fleshing that out into a full degree program and offering things like summer intensives in culinary medicine with a certificate, as well as we're going to have a CME program this summer.
Wow.
That's incredible. So physicians will be able to come up there and get their CME credit and take a culinary medicine class.
Correct. So we're going to offer, it should be, I think it's that last week in July. We're looking at July 20th, 2020. A lot of 20s there. July 20th, 2020. And we're going to offer an intensive. And so that's basically my 3-credit semester introduction to culinary medicine course over just several days, Monday through Friday. And additionally, people are going to have the opportunity, because I have a joint appointment in our College of Health as well as our culinary school, to attend cooking classes in the afternoon. Because it's very important if you're going to go out and teach culinary medicine that you are familiar with the techniques and the methods and really sort of a chef's perspective on things, because that really adds a lot into the equation, into the learning. And then that Friday afternoon at the end of the week, we're going to have a CME program with some featured speakers and cover some broader aspects and applications of culinary medicine, as well as sort of talk about what it is, where it's headed.
Wow. So this entry question is the program that you have going to be more for physicians to learn how to like healthy cooking to convey that to their patients, or is this going to be directly correlated to people that want to get into culinary medicine as a profession?
Well, ultimately, there's going to be the opportunity for people to use culinary medicine as a profession, and certainly now, as this discipline is evolving, there's an opportunity for physicians, really all healthcare providers, to become familiar with this. We're working with folks, with hospitals, hospital systems to help them implement culinary medicine, because it's such a powerful tool on many, many different levels. We have a aspect, having an accredited culinary school here as well. There's an opportunity for people to come into culinary medicine following a culinary track. So one can imagine that hospitals are really offering patient-centric food experiences based on the principles of culinary medicine. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating that I got a lot of positive feedback on in teaching our Introduction to Culinary Medicine class or course over the fall is how many misperceptions there are that still get promulgated, throughout society. I walk in, I'm on the road a lot teaching and working. I walk into the hotel and they're offering, the heart healthy choice breakfast, and it's an egg white omelet. And I'm like,
Exactly.
that's so 1970s. I'm waiting for the disco ball and the Bee Gees to come on over the PA system. So there's really, it's a dynamic field. We're learning things about the gut microbiome. We're learning about nutrigenomics. One of the faculty I've recruited is a world expert in nutrigenomics, and understanding that and really understanding, and what I think sets our culinary medicine course apart from others is understanding those softer edges. And as we're seeing, it's not just what we eat in terms of RDAs or calories, but it's how we eat, it's with whom we eat, it's when we eat, it's where we eat. All these things cycle back in almost a lifestyle medicine type of effect, for either good or for ill.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I know this is really a hot topic in the world right now, is nutrition and diets, and there's so much coming out about it. But I think one of the challenges I think is out there is there's so much information, and there's so many different diets, whether it's a keto diet or vegan, carnivore, they're all Atkins, all various. What are your thoughts on those? And not saying what is the perfect diet, but what would your recommendation be for healthiness?
Well, I think, our approach is one multidisciplinary, which is what you alluded to. So it's not just nutrition. Certainly understanding nutrition is part of it, but we've tried to have a nutrition-focused approach to diet for the last half century, and it's led us to where we are today, which is an explosion of chronic disease and unhealthy people in terms of being overweight and diabetes and so on. So clearly, charting that course doesn't work, and that's why understanding the totality of the food experience, looking at it not just with the doctor's eyes, but understanding it from a chef's perspective is so critical, because the culinary arts are primarily consumer-driven. It's about delivering pleasure to your customers. And that pleasure, that positive aspect is very, very important. There is absolutely not one diet for all of us. I mean, nutrigenomics makes that clear. You can have a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism, in your gene, for example, that deals with the transforming vitamin A from plant-based beta-carotene that we would eat into usable, bioavailable forms of vitamin A. And if you happen to have that mutation, then you can actually suffer ill health effects if you were to be a vegan, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, it's not one size fits all. So what we teach is, what are the principles out there? What does the data really tell us about saturated fat and red meat and all these other salt and all these other things, the buzzwords that we hear? Let's look at the evidence, and then let's make our ingredient selection based on the evidence. And what we're really finding in a nutshell is that it's not about exclusion. As I like to say, there is no salvation in deprivation. So it's not about denying yourself a delicious, red steak in favor of, a turkey burger, for example, because if you happen to be in Montana and you can get grass-finished bison steak, I would argue that is a heck of a lot healthier than one of those industrially produced turkey burgers, where they're crammed in there, they're fed GMO feed. So what we're learning is really something that comes from the culinary world in terms of sourcing quality ingredients. And so it's all about those selections, and then what are the flavor profiles that you enjoy, and apply those and stay away from the highly processing of our foods, the adulterated foods with lots of these additions. We're finding, for example, things that we thought were completely benign, like polysorbate 80, carboxymethylcellulose. These are both common food additives, the whole spectrum of different foods. And while they don't interact with human cells, we're finding they have very detrimental effects on the gut microbiome. So we're altering this gut bacteria that in terms is one of the major players in modulating homeostasis between sort of our desired state and becoming pro-inflammatory. And this inflammation we're seeing is at the root of so many of the chronic maladies we deal with. Heart disease is inflammation, diabetes is inflammation, obesity is inflammation, joint issues are inflammation. So we've gotten kind of out of whack in terms of many aspects of our lifestyle. Culinary medicine obviously predominantly focuses on the culinary aspects of that and try to bring us back and restore us to center.
So I hear a lot how food can be a preventative for disease and sickness. What about food being a cure when you already have a disease or a sickness? How do you feel about that?
There's plenty of great data out there. The PrettyMed group out of Europe has done some phenomenal work looking at what I call the Mediterranean approach to food. And you made a reference to all these diets, and the Mediterranean one is one I like to talk about, because people say, I'm going to put my patients on a Mediterranean diet. And I'm like, well, exactly what is that?
Yeah.
Right, there's like 20 plus countries around the Mediterranean. Is it pasta from southern Italy? Is it polenta from northern Italy? Is it Lebanese lamb stew? Is it harissa from Morocco? Is it, a wonderful foie gras dish from the south of France? All these are Mediterranean countries. So that's why I specifically say it's a Mediterranean approach, because what we do in culinary medicine, for example, this is a great example, is we look and say, what are the similar things in all these different cultures? Because all these different countries, have a advantage when we look in terms of diet and its effect. And what we find is that the Mediterranean diet is really the Mediterranean approach, which is about consuming fresh, wholesome, authentic foods and avoiding a lot of these processed foods, particularly things like sugar-sweetened beverages or diet beverages and the energy drinks and things that, are so ubiquitous, in the Western diet in the United States. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of things that we look at. And when we look at a group like the PrettyMed group, what we find is they've actually reversed type 2 diabetes, reduction in hard endpoints like mortality, stroke, heart disease by having people focus on a Mediterranean approach. And in a fascinating corollary to that, one of the things I stress, one of the books I wrote was The Fallacy of the Calorie, how we're obsessed with calorie counting, which reflects nothing about the quality of the foods we eat. They had a 30% reduction in cardiovascular endpoints on an unrestricted Mediterranean diet, meaning nobody kept track of how many calories you ate, because the Mediterranean diet actually contains more fat than the modern Western diet. So, when we sit down and we look at these things, these dictates that come down, from on high saying, you got to cut out the fat of your diet. But wait, people in France and the Mediterranean are eating way more fat than us, and they're much more healthy. So obviously, that should encourage us to dig deeper. We have a tendency when this data comes in, and you've probably heard about the French paradox, and then we talk about the Inuit paradox, and then we've got all these paradoxes, and we just kind of push that data out of the way and say, well, that's odd. There's the obesity paradox. That doesn't even make sense. That's curious. And then we go back to pushing, guidelines and dictates that have really done nothing but drive us to, I would say, the crisis point we face today in terms of health and chronic debilitating disease and cardiovascular disease at the top of that. It's the number one killer in this country. There's 3 of us chatting today. One of us is going to die of heart disease. Those are the mind-numbing statistics of it all. And some studies suggest that diet could impact up to 70% of cardiovascular events.
Yeah. I actually, I just read last year, How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger.
Can I jump in here? Because I know this book is very popular, but, I have a real bone to pick with that because it's a lie, right? So the first thing in understanding the reality of life, and one of the things we teach in this course, is you will die. All of us will die. So this book about how not to die, in the title, because people get wound up in this idea that if I deprive myself, if I eat this and I don't eat that, I'm going to live forever. Here's how not to die. Well, that's a lie. All of us will die. It's an uncomfortable reality. But having trained for decades and decades as a martial artist, being in the healthcare field, I think it's very irresponsible to put that title out because it's something that we really need to address. And we do a very, very poor job of it in this country and really within the medical community. So it's not about how not to die. It's more about how to cross the finish line.
Yeah,
do you want to be dragged across because of the lifestyle choices you have made, or do you want to stride across under your own power, under your own terms? Again, reflecting the decisions and lifestyle choices you have made. I'm a huge Metallica fan, and one of their songs says it all, my lifestyle determines my death style. So I think it's very important that people realize there is no magic diet. There's not a magic pill. And to put things into people's heads that, if you eat this, you're never going to have a disease. You're never going to suffer and you're never going to die. That's nothing more, in my opinion, than selling, snake oil, because it plays on people's hopes. And the reality of it is we're all going to die. And I think that's even more impetus to say, you know what, while I'm here, I'm going to have great food. I'm going to make sure that I have time with family and friends. I'm going to enjoy the time here, specifically because it's a limited, invaluable resource. I mean, people talk all the time. Anyone in healthcare who walks through an ICU or a CCU sees it all the time, that time is, our most precious gift, and
Absolutely.
It's limited, and you can't get it back. So use it wisely.
And you know what? I knew that asking that because I think the How Not to Die was obviously me being a marketing director, that was definitely for them how do we sell some books? How Not to Die.
Exactly.
But my question was not to go specifically into what Dr. Greger talks about, but he was inspired to go into this part of medicine because he saw how food completely changed his grandmother's life. Changing her diet. He truly believes that it reversed her cancer and kept her alive she was supposed to die around 50, I believe, remembering correctly, and she lived into her 90s. Do you have anything like that you've seen that's inspired you to get into this even more seriously?
There's a great story about a gentleman from Greece, from Ikaria, which is a small island in the Greek archipelago, actually noted for its olive oil and also for the fact that the natives there do a lot of foraging. Most people in the modern West world, certainly in the United States, actually exist on about 10 vegetables, of which corn, wheat, rice, and bananas make up, the top echelon there. So anyway, this guy had emigrated over, and this is actually a well-documented story, and was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he decided he wanted to die at home. So he went home and got off the modern Western diet and went back to, again, what we would call a Mediterranean approach, is traditional diet of the residents of Ikaria. And he lived like another 40 years into his 90s. And the tumor went away.
Wow.
And he did nothing other than continue to exercise. I was a very physical kind of guy, did a lot of physical labor. He continued to do that. And he completely changed his diet and went back to eating real foods. And this is something that's also been seen. Are you familiar with the National Geographic's Blue Zone work done by Dan Buteman, I believe? I'm not sure I got his last name right there, but are you guys familiar with that at all?
I'm not.
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's a great story. It got its name Blue Zones because the people at National Geographic wanted to do some research and do a special on areas of the world where people not only live to be 100 or more, but they're also in great health right up into the end. And so they had a map, and they were identifying these particular pockets around the world, and they had a blue highlighter on the desk, so they circled them in blue, and that's how they became known as Blue Zones. And so Dan's written on this. It's available at National Geographic. They've done a lot of great research. Long story short, what they've found is that there's not one particular diet. There's not one magic elixir, as we've alluded to, but it's a combination of social support. It's a combination of eating wholesome, authentic food. So everywhere they went, these people, whether they ate red meat or they ate vegetables or they ate fish or they drank red wine or they drank rice wine, whatever it was very wholesome, natural foods. And again, they had a very strong social support network, and that's what identified areas of great health, because it was all around the world, so it wasn't somebody's isolated genetics. And this is in concert with what was found with the Harvard Happiness Study, which was a 75-year, two-part study, the Grant and the Glueck studies, where they followed people in the United States for over 70 years and said, amongst all the variables in our lives, what is most important? What are the top things that determine how long we live, how well we live, how satisfied we are with our lives? And very simply, it turned out to be the quality of our relationships. And I would submit to you that amongst the relationships in our lives that are most important is our relationship with food. And our relationship with food, being social creatures, often is the foundation and serves as a fulcrum for our relationships with each other. And that, forgive the pun, at the heart of it is what our culinary medicine program seeks to educate and explore and apply.
This is a good question for you because you seem super passionate about your specialty. If you had to give some advice to physicians coming out of training, ready to pick their specialty, what advice would you give them to help navigate this process?
follow your passion. You don't want to walk into, medicine has changed a lot in the decades that I've been doing it. And, you don't want to work into the hospital, into your office, really in any job, and find yourself frustrated and just trying to get done. You want to be passionate, about what you do. So follow that passion wherever it leads. There was no such thing as culinary medicine, when I started out, and it's been a long, strange trip to bring this, birthing into being, make it a reality that is happening now, all around us. Certainly if folks are interested in something like this, we've educated physicians to put culinary medicine into their practice. We're working with healthcare institutions and hospitals, and if anybody's listening out there that's interested, they can certainly contact me and we'll get them, started. But the most important thing for anything in life, it's Joseph Campbell. When I was a very young man, I read his books. Very powerful author, the hero of a thousand faces, and so on and so forth. PBS specials. But something always stuck with me, and he said, whatever you do in life, follow your bliss. And I think that has turned out over the course of my life to be great advice. And so wherever in medicine, because something obviously attracted you to pursue this field, follow that passion wherever it takes you, and just look, for good teachers.
No, I think it's great advice, and that's really echoes the same sentiment of most people that we have on the podcast. Is when you're choosing a specialty, it's you got to have something. You're doing something for the next 30 years. It's got to be something you have a passion about. But I have a question for you, Dr. Fenster. After you finished your cardiology, what made you decide to do interventions as another fellowship? How do you go about making that decision? Why did you choose to get into specifically interventional cardiology?
I think it has to do with your personality. All the great interventional cardiologists I've ever met were a bit OCD. Mm-hmm. And, we've got, I think, sort of that fighter pilot, race car driver gene buried somewhere in us. And it's about getting in there and fixing it and making it right and really pushing the edge. I loved the science of cardiology particularly in terms of the hemodynamics and flow data. And, it's just an amazing thing to me to think, our heart starts beating in the womb. And, that's the thing that powers us, throughout, our trip on this plane, throughout, our life. And so many ancient cultures, talked about living in our heart. The heart was the seat of who we are. And I think sometimes in our society, we could do with a little bit of that wisdom and live more in our heart and less in our heads, because that can be a pretty sterile, depressing sort of place. So I think that, for me, the interest in the science of cardiology, the lore of the function of the heart throughout the history of humankind, and then you throw in a bit of that instant gratification and pushing the envelope with really cool technology, and exploring that and making an immediate difference, on the frontier between life and death. And for me, boy, you couldn't have picked something that sort of excites me in terms of, my passion. And I've done this for many years and gotten a lot of radiation. And, as we mature and we go through life, different passions meld and resurface. And I'm as excited about culinary medicine now as I have been about interventional cardiology, when I started out on that path, in my teens and 20s.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with a couple of interventional cardiologists, and you're so accurate with the way you described it. Because one of them had climbed Everest, and that's what her passion was. She actually tried it 3 times, and she was up there one time when there was an avalanche happened, and they had to shut everything down. So she actually got to base camp 3 times before she could finally summit it. And talked to another guy who his passion is he races sailboats. So across the world and everything. So you can definitely tell. I don't want to say if it's an adrenaline junkie, but they have that passion for life with most interventional cardiologists that I talk to.
Yeah, there's definitely sort of a thrill gene that I think you have to have. I mean, you talk to a fighter pilot or a race car driver, and they watch somebody wreck. And I remember a quote from the late great Dale Earnhardt, and he said, "Well, they said, wow, you just about wrecked before you won that championship at Atlanta Motor Speedway." And he said, "Well, of course," he said, "I'm a 7-time Winston Cup champion. I can drive it, harder and faster than anyone else can." And he said, "No, I can't." But you have to have that attitude that, where somebody else would have failed, I would have succeeded. And you have to have, I think, the confidence to walk in there and say, "Yeah, I can fix this.
Yeah.
We're going to get this done." If you don't, if you have doubt, and it's not to say that we're reckless about it, far from it. It's the exact opposite. As you point out, it's like, being an astronaut, you're willing to push those boundaries and those frontiers and, do things that have a real element of life and death, because it just doesn't get any more soul-defining than that to participate in that. And it's a great gift. Patients trust you, to help them. And it's a very helpless thing to be a patient on the table having a huge heart attack at the cusp of death, and to have, to invite somebody in basically and say, "Yeah, here I am, help me." Heady stuff. It's a heady brew.
It is, and I know it's similar to what Alex Arnold said, the guy who climbed that free soloed up
in Yosemite.
In Yosemite. He said, "I'm able to do this because I take the ultimate precautions." He said, "This is not a death wish. I take every precaution possible, which is why I'm able to do this."
And I think for those of us that have had the good fortune and really the blessing to be able to do this craft for really any number of years, is to go back to what we talked about earlier, a great appreciation for, life and death. Mm-hmm. And to realize, what a precious gift our time here is, and how we can, help people have the best life, have the best experience. And from my little, 2 cents from my world, that's about communicating that and enriching that, through the food experience, bringing pleasure as a chef, but also bringing, healing, as a physician. And I would say when you meld those two together, you kind of have the ultimate cardiology thing, because you heal broken hearts, both literally and figuratively. Yeah. And, sounds a little corny, but I like it.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but we have a couple more questions for you. This one is one of my favorites. What has been, I would say as a cardiologist, what has been your most interesting case to date?
Probably doing a emergency procedure on a critically ill patient, they actually presented with anomalous coronary artery. We wrote this up many years ago as a case report, and, first of all, engaging that thing and, doing the wires and, like I said, under emergent situation, and then stenting the anomalous coronary and, opening that back up. That was probably amongst the most interesting cases that I've done, just because, you experience that once, and there's a good chance you will go your entire career never experiencing something like that. So, particularly because it had a great outcome, too. It's always a good memory.
That always makes it easier, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Alex, I think last question for us, and I really appreciate you being flexible with your time. This has been absolutely fascinating. What advice would you give to somebody, whether they're in medical school, residency, fellowship? What advice would you give somebody coming out and getting into the world of medicine?
there are a lot of changes, and like most things in modern Western society, the rate of change is accelerating. And I encourage people to get involved, be passionate, and really to think. What we have seen, to draw an analogy in the world of food, is a concept by the sociologist George Ritzer called the McDonaldization, of Western society. And so we implement algorithms and we do things often faster, but that does not necessarily make them better. And so I see that happening more and more in medicine, where patients are not individuals or people. They're simply, collections that fit in certain silos, and we apply certain algorithms. When you go into medicine, don't be a fast food worker and assemble food. In medicine, be a chef and craft something of quality, of individuality, for your patients and your pursuits. Because if we don't do that, I think that what we will find is that we will be replaced, because a computer is much better at sorting and funneling through algorithms than human beings are. And if we lose that touch of humanity in whatever aspect of medicine you decide to go into, we will, in the very near future, probably not my lifetime, but probably in the lifetime of those people entering medical school and residency and things now, within their lifetime, be quickly replaced, by a computer algorithm. And I think that is a great disservice to all of humanity.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, I can't believe we're out of time already. If any of our listeners want to look you up, Dr. Fenster, maybe get your book, where would they find you?
They can visit me at chefdrmike.com, and you could follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and you can also email me from that website. The website is undergoing some updates and an overhaul as we head into the new year, so it may be down for a couple of days, but the email link should be there, and I answer all my own emails, so feel free. You can also find all my books on Amazon. If you read them and you like them, do give it the 4 stars. My publishers love that, so we appreciate that. And yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody regarding their thoughts, impressions, whatever. It's been a really a fun ability to chat with you on. I think we covered kind of a whole broad range of things, but that's what life's about. That's what makes it great and makes it interesting.
Absolutely. And I'll link all of your information in the description part of this podcast. But thank you so much for giving us your precious time today. We're super thankful to get to know you and what you do. And I know I always say this, we always say to veterans, thanking them for their service. But I feel like doctors, I like to say this to you guys too. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you. It's very, very much appreciated. And as we all know, simple acts of kindness go a long way, and that's powerful medicine in and of its own right. And much appreciated. Thank you all, and thank all of the folks out there that listen to this today. So much appreciated all around.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Fenster.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all our listeners. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes air, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you to Pacific Companies. Without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. If you'd like to be a guest or for more information, go to www.pacificcompanies.com.